my gosh, it is treacherous. Warning to everyone. My last name begins with S, and so I've spent 35 years never having to go first when things are alphabetical. We have a very strange young people's pool in which Schrefer happens to be the first name up, so bear with me. 2 years ago, I was here talking about bonobos, which were the topic of my book, Endangered, which are a peace-loving matriarchal ape. So I was working out my mommy issues with you then, and now I'm talking about the chimpanzees, which are patrilineal and very dominant. So I'm working through my daddy issues with you tonight. So Threatened is the story of an orphan named Luke, who's about 12 years old, who winds up stranded in the jungle helping a dubious professor. He's named Prof in this passage that I'm reading. You're also going to hear two other names, Mango and Beggar. They are chimpanzees. Anyone who you're not sure who it is, just assume they're a chimp. It was a half-rotted okume, its black bark slick with moss. As I pressed my fingers against the trunk, the wet outer layer squished into the layer of bugs and crunchy wood beneath. I gripped a low branch while I flailed a leg higher until it caught on the next branch up. After a few minutes of exertion, I was above the nest. There, Beggar was. Lying on her side, she had her hands pinned between her thighs, looking over the side of the nest with a serene but absent air, like she was watching herself from somewhere outside of her body. The old chimp was alive, but breathing shallowly. The body was all beast, but the eyes brought back thoughts of my mother in the hospital bed, how she too had once looked at me and seen nothing. I crept along the branch. Beggar turned and watched me with her wide eyes, tilting her head to see me better. She let out a long sigh. If she was alarmed by me, she didn't have the energy to express it. Her branch was near enough to mine that I was able to transition over, sling my legs over the edge, and sit beside her. As I nervously stroked her forearm, she made wheezing sounds. Staring at my hand as I groomed, Beggar adjusted her legs so her arms came free. I picked up one of those old, roughed hands and held it. She lifted her head an inch, her chest shivered, then she let it rest back down into the bundled leaves. I clenched her hand. Maybe she didn't care if she died alone, but it mattered to me. I heard a rustling and small squeaks from below. Then Mango's head appeared over the side of the nest. Before I could stop her, she was crawling over my lap to huddle in next to her mother. Her eyes on mine, she tugged at Beggar's lips and ears. When I didn't do anything to help, she gave up on me and tried to suckle. But she soon gave up on that too. Mango perched on the skinny bit of space that remained at the nest's edge and lay on her side. Resigned and miserable, she propped her head up on a folded arm, fixing me with a stare that was complicated and lost. Up close, I could see that her hair was patchy in places, where she'd probably plucked it out by over-grooming. She burrowed like she wanted to be closer to her mother than was possible, like she couldn't get enough heat from Beggar's body. When I lifted her arm, Beggar grunted weakly in protest. I rolled Mango toward her mother, provoking some outraged squeaks of surprise, and then placed her mother's arm over her. Mango immediately quieted and tucked in, trying again for the nipple. She was shivering, I realized, even surrounded by her mother's body. I thought of the failed attempts at suckling I'd seen the other day and worried that Mango wasn't getting enough nourishment, that she would soon go the way of her mother. For right now, I was glad that she and Beggar were together. I wish there was something I could do to keep things that way. Prof whistled sharply from below. Now that he'd alerted me to it, I could hear a distant drumming. I scrambled down the tree. As I tumbled the final length to the ground, I looked up to see Mango had untangled herself from her mother and was staring over the edge of the nest, watching me hurry away. We rushed from the clearing. Once we got back to camp, I took a deep breath, ready to tell Prof what I'd seen of Beggar and her wound. But before I could speak, he shook his head sternly and muttered something about improper scientific method. Suddenly I was tearing up, and before I could even try to hide my tears, I was sobbing. I kneeled on the ground, head in my hands. Once I was able, I looked up and saw Prof kneeling beside me, his hands on his knees. The old chimp mother is dying, Prof, I managed to get out. She's never going to get back out of that nest, and we have no way of knowing why and no way of helping Mango. Many chimps have lived and died in this jungle without anyone knowing about it, Prof said. I hated him for being so reasonable. But when I looked at his expression, I also saw something unexpected there, a broad, deep suffering that I realized had always been his. His sympathy was wider and calmer than mine, expansive enough to include the inside and the outside and everything in both. I found myself wondering, not for the first time, what Prof had been through before in his life to bring him here now. They're alone there, I said, tears leaving my voice. Mango and Beggar, in that tree, they're all alone. Other chimps are there by now, Prof said. I was furious again, that he hadn't known what I meant by alone, that I hadn't known what I meant by alone. And I was furious, too, that I was crying, that I'd proven I could. You know, Prof said, whispering like he'd wandered into someone's home and was worried about being overheard. When you think about it, all survival stories that end happily are also family stories. Thank you.